Hello, everybody. Welcome to Hash Rate. My guests today, very special show. We have the great Andre Cronje and Michael Kong. Hello, gentlemen. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us, Mark.
My pleasure. So, Andre, big fan, first time caller. I was there for the Wi-Fi days. I was there on the Wi-Fi Mint Rush. I don't know if you call it Mint Rush, but I call it Mint Rush. And I famously missed day one because my girl was taking me out to sushi because it was my birthday. So that was a very expensive day to miss. And by day two, I'd figured out what was going on. So I got in day two and day three. So I was very happy about that. So thank you. Thank you for the Wi-Fi stuff. That was a great time. And kicking off DeFi Summer.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
So look, I wish I could say it was by design, but that was just a sequence of unfortunate or fortunate events, depending on how you want to look at it. So happy it turned out the way it did, but definitely, wasn't actually planned that way.
Yeah, you were the way I understand it was you were working on a tool for yourself, and you basically went, yeah, this is pretty cool. I should maybe make this available to the public. Is that basically correct?
Yeah, I mean that was all long before Token. But originally, Yearn was because I was managing Fantom's treasury, and I got tired of moving it around manually. So I just built something that'll automate that on chain. And then I was still kind of logging in daily to initiate, because the thing about anything on blockchain is there's no internal way for it to trigger an action. So you still need an external activity to trigger an on-chain action. So on a daily basis, I still had to send a transaction to say, hey, go find the best yield and then park the funds there. And so it just made sense to open it up to multiple users, because then whenever anyone interacts with it, then it automatically looks for the best place. So again, wasn't really even intentional to It wasn't designed with the idea of, hey, I'm going to build a tool for other people. It was just, if I open it to other people, it's more convenient for me. So
yeah, you were
that's
like
why
a
I said,
human
glad
job.
everything worked out.
Yeah, you're a human cron job, basically moving Fantom stuff around. So you mean, or a Cronje job, as it were, right? Sorry, bad puns are part of the show. What can I do?
I will still with that.
All right, so let's move on to Sonic, because that's the present. So big congratulations! You guys launched a completely new chain, and it was sort of years in the making. And I've also been a big Fantom fan. I've held Fantom for years and participated sort of in DeFi Summer in the Fantom universe. So I was very familiar with how fast and great the experience was just on Fantom before you improved it into Sonic. But now you launched this completely new chain, and holy shit, is it fast! And so big congratulations. About 4 months old-ish at this point. According to DeFi Llama, it says you guys have $1 billion in TVL. There's some debate about that. I've heard other people say $2 billion. But I can say for sure you guys have flipped Polygon and Optimism. You're now sitting at around 12 or so at least on the DeFi Llama charts. And, a couple of years ago, I don't think anybody thought that was going to happen. Especially with Polygon, right? Polygon was running around doing all these, biz dev deals. It looked like they were going to control the planet at one point, right? So you guys flipped them, and sort of just to finish the stats that I'm aware of the chain, Sonic can do a theoretical 400,000 transactions per second with 0.2 second finality. And there's some haziness on what the stats are. Can you guys sort of tell me exactly what's going on? What can you tell us about the speed and the finality?
Well, in terms of the speed and finality, as I like to say to people, we can talk about numbers, we can talk about the 400,000 that ChainSpec put out. We can talk about block times that you can see on Sonic Scan, which are about 300 to 400 milliseconds or 0.3 to 0.4 milliseconds. They get generated by. But in the end, what really matters is not so much these numbers. It's more so about the user experience, right? So as you mentioned, Mark, it's just fast, right? You've gone and used the chain, and you can see that transactions just seem to be very smooth. They just get confirmed really fast. One block finality. You just click your fingers and the transaction is done. And that's all I really say to people is not so worry about all these numbers that are put out there, because the problem with the numbers is that we can justify a lot of our numbers. I can go into kind of the more technical explanation of it, but a lot of the
Yeah.
comparisons that are made are not really apples to apples comparisons, because you have to consider a number of different factors. For example, like, what do you mean by a transaction? Some transactions are a lot simpler than others. If I submit, if I change like my balance, I send one S from myself to say Andre, that's obviously a lot more simple transaction than if I'm engaging in some sort of really, really complicated DeFi transaction. So what I just say to people is just experience it yourself. Go to Sonic, do a bunch of transactions, see what it's like, and then go to other chains, do a bunch of transactions and see what it's like. And I think a lot of people will notice the difference. One other comment I just wanted to quickly make is that I'm also particularly pleased by a number of applications and how they've been able to integrate with our network, because our network is so fast. What I was concerned about like earlier on, before applications started deploying on Sonic, was, would they be able to keep up with the speed? Or would there be like lag on their side, which would make it appear that the underlying chain itself is not very fast? But fortunately, a lot of applications that I've deployed have been able to take advantage of Sonic speed. And so you don't really see like any slowdown in any aspect of submitting a transaction through their interface. So that's something that, I'm quite happy about.
Well, I think I saw Andre post something really interesting, and that is a lot of the classic EVM applications that transplanted themselves from Ethereum or wherever over to Sonic. The UIs broke because Sonic was so fast that the old UI assumed slow chains kind of behind it. So, screens would blink by really fast. So you guys actually had to go in and rewrite some of the UIs, or help the teams rewrite the UIs in some instances. So that was kind of mind bending, right?
Yeah, I mean, luckily that's a pretty easy fix, right? Like all of these teams in their front ends, what they do nowadays is a pattern called async await. So you send a request, and then in the back end you start a secondary thread, and that thread kind of monitors until it gets a response on that request. Sonic RPCs are just so fast that if you do that, you are forcibly slowing down your UI and can often cause issues because you're waiting for a transaction to tell you it went from pending to finalized, but it actually reached finalized before you started that thread, and then you can have a sort of a deadlock / hang moment.
Yeah.
And the fix is just remove all of that code. Like, just go away from async, just make it direct synchronous RPC, as 99% of the web as we know it. And I mean, you feel it, right? It's just more responsive. It's just more interactive. That's really been the only part where like some people have felt that Sonic is maybe a bit slow, is just when apps haven't sort of updated their UIs for faster tech.
And you can see that's the case when, if you interact with an application and it says, transaction being confirmed, or there's like a spinning icon, but then you go to the blockchain explorer, you can see that it's already confirmed. And that it's not just like one block confirmed, there's already like 10 other blocks that have been issued like afterwards anyway. So that's how you can tell that, the transaction has definitely gone through and been confirmed in a very fast period of time, and that the application is maybe lagging a little bit behind. But as Andre mentioned, that is like a pretty easy fix.
Yeah, and I think the other sort of big point to make here with what you guys have achieved is the finality within a fifth of a second. And I think a lot of people like that. That's something you don't feel, but it's intellectually it's extremely important, and you will feel it in other ways. Down the road as more complex applications are built on the chain. But I talk to a lot of my friends, right? And I've got a lot of blockchainy friends, and some of them have developed on Solana and other chains and EVM chains and EOS and things like that. And one of the things I hear when I bring up Sonic, and when I used to bring up Fantom, but more so now Sonic, my friends are like, yeah, it's another fast chain. We got Sui, we got Sonic, but Solana's sort of taken the lead and has the most liquidity and TVL built up in it. And it's got the VC backing. What is it that's special about Sonic? And then, the other thing that they say is, when we build things on Solana, sometimes the transactions, like, you don't really know whether the transaction went through or is going to get rejected by the chain. The finality is kind of squirrely on Solana from what I'm told. Whereas that is not true on Sonic, and frankly, it wasn't true on EOS either. EOS transactions seem to more or less confirm instantly and definitely be done. What can you tell me about Finality, and why is that important, and how does that compare to the Finality on Solana?
Yeah, I just give kind of like a quick answer, and then I think Andre can probably give the more detailed answer. But I would slightly disagree with what you said there, Mark. You're saying that it doesn't really seem to matter to like the end user right now, or maybe more in the future. It absolutely does matter to the end user. I think the most important thing for an individual user is the time to finality, because it's basically how long does it take for your transaction to be confirmed on the network. So, if I submit a query, for example, to Google, you want to wait as least time as possible to get your results back. And that's equivalent to what we call finality on a blockchain, right? When I submit a transaction, whatever it might be, updating a balance or interacting with an application, I want to know that my transactions be confirmed as soon as possible so I can submit further transactions or just get on with my life. That's why finality is so important, and getting that number down on an individual basis is really, really important. It's a big challenge, especially when you get to like the smaller numbers, but definitely, as low as possible is always good. The way that finality works at a general level on Sonic is that we only require one block to confirm a transaction. So if you look at what we call like PBFT or finality, that's based on like what's known as the longest chain rule, like you have for Ethereum or blockchain or Bitcoin, is that in order for a transaction to be confirmed, it's all probabilistic, right? And so you have to have subsequent blocks on the network, because if you don't have subsequent blocks in the network, you can have forks in the chain, and so you don't know if your transaction is really included in the final chain. The consensus for Sonic operates very, very differently from that. It's what we call ABFT, or asynchronous Byzantine fault tolerance. Basically, in general, it means that when you confirm a transaction in a block, the block gets propagated to the rest of the network. You sign off on the block, and then it's final. And there's no ability to fork the network, meaning that you don't need to have the longest chain rule. And the reason there's no ability to fork the network is that if you try and fork the network and you disagree with the 2/3 majority on the network, you get labeled as a cheater, and the network will penalize you by taking away some of your stake if you try and have that sort of behavior. So the chain is very unforgiving for those that are trying to fork it, which means that we can get away with just, as soon as your transaction is confirmed by a majority of the network in that single block, then it's final and it's irreversible. It's real consensus, right? So you need to have over 2/3 of the validating power to confirm a block in order for the transaction to be confirmed within the network itself, right? I think like what other chains have done, in particular, say like L2s, is that they kind of like claim that they're also like running blockchain technology and that they're following like a similar pattern. In reality, they're basically just like a single database that confirms the transaction and sends it elsewhere for finalization. So for like an L2, they'll confirm it on a separate database and then have that batch to, say, Ethereum, right? Yeah. And so a lot of the other chains have just been trading off essentially security or decentralization for performance. Now, there's always a trade-off between the three of them because of the nature of the technology, right? Yep. And also just from a common sense point of view that, obviously confirming a transaction on one database is going to be faster than confirming it on 10 or 100 or any number that's greater than 1. But what's important is not that we found like a magical solution where there's no trade-off, but it's about how do you like minimize the cost of the trade-off that's happening. So, hope that answers the question, generally speaking.
Well, and maybe just to add on to that, I don't personally think speed is the differentiator. I think we're in an age where all blockchains need a certain baseline of speed and throughput, finality, however you want to frame it. To me, it comes down to responsiveness and user experience. If the user uses the dApp on Solana, on Base, or us, which one feels the best to the user? So that's one part of it. But I mean, whether Base uses their TE blocks or Solana uses their streaming, whatever they call it, or you use us. Ultimately, there you won't feel too much of a difference. A big reason why we aimed for the speed we did that we launched with is because over the next year or two, we are going to be making our blockchain slower. Why is that? And the reason for that is all of these extra features we're adding in natively to the base layer. So the first one we've launched, fee monetization, where developers earn 90% of the fees. So if you do a transaction on Solana or Base, all of that money is going to the validators on Solana or Coinbase on Base. On Sonic, that goes to the devs. So that's already a big differentiator. But there's now extra logic we add into every single transaction. So on Base or Solana, where you send a transaction and it's just a transaction, on Sonic, every time a transaction happens, it needs to do that little bit of extra math. It needs to check, okay, am I supposed to pay out to the contract deployer? And where does it go and how much goes there? So that's already slower. Next thing we're doing is dynamic fees, which allow the dApp developer to configure the fee amount they want to charge. I don't know if you would have noticed, but if you look at Fantom's fee graph, you'll see we have almost no spikes. It's very unlikely for fee spikes to occur, but this does mean we're always incredibly cheap. Now, that's not necessarily great if you take it into consideration with fee monetization. If you're maybe an app that only does 10 or 20 transactions a day, you can charge your user more if they are willing to pay for that activity they're doing. So dynamic fees is the next one. But again, now each time a transaction happens, it first has to go check, hey, am I supposed to adjust this fee amount? The next one we're releasing is native account abstraction so that users no longer need wallets. Again, that means there's a smart contract sitting somewhere, but every time a transaction occurs, it'll have to do a little bit of verification on the external party that's executing, whether that's OAuth or Web3 or passkey or whatever. And then there's also gas abstraction, which basically means, what do we call it again? Fee sub. Which means that the dApp can subsidize fees for the user. Now, all of these things make our blockchain slower. So we need to be that much faster than our competitors so that we can slow it down so that we can match the competitors. Because ultimately, what we want to achieve after those 4 features are live, and we go back to my original statement, which is how is the experience for the end user? Yeah. The end user on Solana or Base need to use their MetaMask, their Rabbi, their Fantom wallet. They need to have gas in that wallet, so they need to buy Solana or ETH and transfer it onto those wallets and then interact and then wait for the confirmation. The end user on Sonic doesn't need a wallet. They don't need gas. They click, it's done, and 90% of those fees go to the developer. That's the differentiation.
That's actually extremely huge. And thank you for making all those points. I did have the fee monetization coming up next, but thank you for going there. So when I speak with my friends, and my friends tell me, why would I build on Sonic when Solana has will have soon, theoretically, we don't really, with Fire Dancer, 1 million transactions per second. In effect, their argument is, but this one is one louder. It goes to 11, right? Like that's kind of what it sounds like in my ears, right? But I mean, they have a point, right? Like, why would I go with the slower one? And the answer to that, in part at least, is because on Sonic, the fee monetization is a really big deal. Your application gets the money that the validators on other blockchains normally get, and that can be extremely large, as I think you, Andre, pointed out on X. With Uniswap, it's billions of dollars that Uniswap did not get, that they probably should have gotten, that on Sonic they would have gotten, and in the future will get. So that's a very big reason to build your app on Sonic, just right there. If it's more or less the same in terms of speed, but you get the money, that's a really big reason to build on Sonic. And secondarily, all the the other issue you brought up of whenever somebody goes to a new chain, there's always the problem of getting the gas token. And I've heard that come up a lot when I speak with my friends where they're trying to design things. They're like, well, how do we got to somebody, and what that means is the user has to figure out, it has to like go to a centralized exchange, right? And figure out, okay, how do I do this? How do I go through the KYC? How do I swipe my credit card, get the gas token, move it into my wallet, on my desktop so that I can use the chain? That's a lot of stuff. That's not AOL simple. And what you were proposing is, well, we're going to get rid of all those steps, and just have a user come in, and for the very first time when they use Sonic, the application will effectively subsidize their gas token fees and usage by, kind of paying for their gas for them. You're using the gas from them. So the user doesn't have the problem of having to, how do I get the gas token? I don't know, right? So that just goes away. And that is a massive, massive leap forward for usability.
Yeah, I mean, look, we looked at standard, sort of traditional onboarding mechanisms. And I mean, so many apps, use some kind of freemium or trial model because they first want to show you, hey, this is what you're going to get before you need to pay. Yeah. I mean, you can imagine what the drop-off and churn would be on all of those apps if the first thing they did was, hey, go open a bank account at this specific bank and then fund this specific account with this specific currency, and then you can come sign up for us. It's crazy. So yeah, I mean, speed. I'm very proud and happy of what we achieved, but I don't even think that's our differentiator. Our differentiators is how do we make our apps and their users' lives less complicated. And I don't really think that's something that anyone is actually even trying to address. I mean, I haven't seen it on any of our team's roadmaps.
I agree with you. And I being sort of an older guy, I find that really weird. And I remember, right, like I don't know, I'm not sure how old you are, but I think we're sort of similar. I'm like in my 50s. But when I so I came out of the startup, venture-backed startup world where we all lived and died on the UI. And when I got into the blockchain world, it was like nobody paid any attention at all to the UIs or the customer experience. It was just like we don't give a shit. We don't care. And because there's money involved, people struggled through the hard UIs and the hard wallets to make money. Right. So there was a reason to sort of get through it, but sort of the 95% of humanity just could not get through that. And the blockchain people didn't seem to care. And I found that very weird. So I'm really happy to hear that you're going.
Look, it's a little bit of a like those things you say now. If you go back to really the early days of the internet, the barriers of access, as you would know, were huge. You had to have your own modems. You need to dial up to specific locations. You couldn't use the phone line at the same time. The stuff you could do was incredibly expensive. If you wanted to download a picture, that's like $100. So the only apps that really made sense back then were very, very financially incentivized as well, because there had to be a cost reason for you to validate spending that cost, other than the pure technologists, obviously. Now, fast forward a lot of years and, access is there, speed is there, throughput is there. All of a sudden it costs, fractions of a cent for that same image.
Yeah.
And blockchain had to go through that same path because it is reinventing the internet in a decentralized and a disintermediary way. So up until now, only really financial applications did make sense, and that's why we're seeing DeFi is the biggest, real world assets is the biggest, lending, all the usual financially driven stuff. But that's also partly because stuff like SocialFi, GameFi, or just gaming and social, not even Fi. Couldn't really exist because, you're not going to pay, $6 every time you want to post something on X or on Instagram. So the blockchains had to get fast enough so that they could get cheap enough so that all of a sudden those kinds of apps start making sense. But now at the same time, so now we've reached the speed so that apps like that make sense. Finally, social media, streaming, gaming makes sense. It's cheap enough. It's fast enough. But now most of those apps, their user base is not willing to go through that learning journey that financial apps are willing to go through. So, they're not willing to figure out wallets and money and that kind of stuff. So that's why we now need to go into this next sort of evolution on chain. Like in defense of the guys, a year ago, 5 years ago, however many long years ago we're talking about now, that is the only stuff that made sense. You wouldn't have been able to build gaming or social stuff back then. It's just too prohibitively expensive. So that's, it's always, as with the original internet, it's always going to be this competition between capacity and demand. So I think for the last few years, demand was very high. Now we have capacity. So now we're going to build towards filling that capacity with demand again. And then hopefully by that next sort of cap, we're ready with the next tech.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about the apps, because I think that was where I was going to go next anyway. So I want to talk about what is happening right now in the Sonic ecosystem, and secondarily, what is the market segment that you are most interested in, or maybe the top three, to win at the game of becoming the world's premier blockchain infrastructure? Where do you see that? Where do you see that going? Where are you trying to go to? How are you going to cross the chasm, I guess?
So a big focus at the moment, as probably a lot of people are aware, a lot of your audience is aware, is onboarding a lot of DeFi protocols. I think like one of the advantages that we have over other chains is in the DeFi category for a number of reasons. One is the branding, obviously the association with Andre, and also just the history as well, that people know that with our old chain Fantom, we had a lot of DeFi activity. We were, I think, at one point like the second or third highest TVL on chain. We had over $10 billion on chain, and there was a lot of activity happening there. And so
I remember those
a lot
days.
of our strategy has been with the incentive programs, with the yields, et cetera, has been onboarding people to come on chain. And I think that has been like very successful at the moment. Over $500,000 in bridged USDC has come over. That will all be automatically converted to native when the native USDC gets supported on the network. As you mentioned, over $1 billion in like TVL. And we've seen a lot of transactions occur on the network now. We reached over 1 million daily transactions just a couple of days ago, a lot of that largely driven by DeFi. But I think what's like very important to note is that, I don't want Sonic just to be seen as like the DeFi chain, that if you want to, that the only thing you can do on Sonic is DeFi, because that's definitely not the case. Obviously, the underlying technology is that we are a generalized smart contract platform, meaning that any sort of application that runs on smart contracts can take advantage of Sonic's technology. And one of the very important features that Andre briefly outlined before that is coming to the network is called dynamic fees, and that allows developers to set the transaction fee that they want to charge to their users on an application basis rather than on a network basis. And that's a feature that, to my knowledge, we haven't seen on any other chain before, but I think is very important, because just economically, if you're setting like one price for the transaction fees, it doesn't really make sense, because some applications might want to charge higher fees than others. So like I can envision that in terms of two broad categories of applications, DeFi and gaming, that you're going to have a very different fee split than on the gaming side, because there's less economic gain to be made on each transaction, and because there's likely to be a lot more daily transactions for an average user on a game versus a DeFi application, you're likely to have games basically set a very low fee per individual transaction for their applications. Meanwhile, on DeFi, because there's potential for more gain there per transaction, you're probably likely to see DeFi applications charge a higher fee, which users are willing to accept. So dynamic fees is important because it just creates a more efficient marketplace. In the end, it's just supply and demand. In the end, the developers want to charge as high a fee as possible that the users are willing to accept in order to make money for themselves via fee monetization. And that's where you see like the connection between the different components that Andre mentioned come together, that dynamic fees plus fee monetization gives a greater incentive for developers to want to build on Sonic versus other chains that are out there. So dynamic fees is very important in terms of getting very different categories of applications to come to the network. So, in short, a lot of our applications right now are DeFi-based applications across many different categories, but we also do have a number of games that have deployed on the network that are growing pretty well. And I think when they're able to set their own dynamic fees lower than probably the current fee rate, they're probably going to get a lot more users as well, just because the cost per user is going to go down dramatically.
So the dynamic fees is the feature that will enable these new kinds of applications. And yes, I have seen all the classic DeFi applications move over, and I was very happy to see USDC issuing native USDC canonical stablecoin on Sonic, as well as Aave now with a big presence on Sonic. Lending is the beating heart of DeFi, and Aave is the beating heart of lending. So seeing that, make a big stab at Sonic, that to me, that was a big deal. And I think that will all, that's going to happen. But I like the idea of going after gaming. So do you have a concerted effort to do business development and outreach to the gaming world? Is that sort of where, are you making any effort to sort of recruit applications, or are they sort of coming to you? How is that happening? Because I know Polygon had like a very sort of outbound, very aggressive, for a while, a very aggressive outbound business development effort that was more or less successful for about a year. So I'm just wondering, how do you guys think about that?
Sam and Matt and the BD team, I think, can speak more towards that than me and Kong necessarily. But it's a mix of inbound and outbound. I think currently it's a lot more inbound than outbound.
Yeah.
And that's keeping the team kind of busy 24/7.
Yeah.
They do sort of selective outbound, but I mean, for now, it's more about just productionizing all of our features, because ultimately, even though we will have still inbound and outbound BD, teams should never actually need to interact with us. I mean, if I want to go sign up to go build an app on AWS, I don't first need to like send an email to their inbound BD team. I make my account, I deploy my code, and I start earning money. Our focus is more about getting it there, to remove the human elements so that we don't actually need that sort of interaction. Because at the same time, there's the apps you don't know about, and then you're not going to do outreach to them because you don't know about them. And then there are the apps that do get a lot of attention, but everyone knows about them. And then, you've got teams willing to throw millions of dollars at them in illiquid tokens, which we're just not willing to do. So Then we don't want to compete there in any case. But so far it's been mostly organically. I do think, with Seg, Johan, and the very DeFi BD focused guys, I don't even want to call them BD, because they spend their time more thinking about how existing teams can do composability and interact with other teams on the network. So that's more about lifting existing teams. We're maybe a little bit overly loyalist at this point. A good answer. Where the teams that have committed to building on us, we like to spend a lot of time lifting them up instead of trying to attract a bunch of new ones. I mean, gaming, I think we have a bunch of fantastic teams already. Est4, Sakura, and no, I feel bad. I forgot what's her name.
Fate Adventure.
Thank you. How did I forget Fate Adventure? I wanted to say the Ling game, and I was like, no, that's not the name. Fate Adventure, which I think are already doing phenomenal work in the gaming sector. But we'll see more of that when those other features come online. And then DeFi, we also, it's a bit of both, right? Because you can be very aggressive on the BD, and we can get 10 lending protocols, but that just sort of spreads our liquidity. It creates bad UI. Users don't know what to use and where to go. So we did that with Fantom originally, where we were very credibly neutral. We didn't really engage. Everyone deployed whatever they deployed. This time around, we're seeing ourselves as a bit more of a facilitator / enabler, and we're trying to really sort of max help the teams we have now. And make them feel special, because that's also the thing that makes them stick around. If you're just chain number 5 they deployed on, then it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I'm feeling you on that one. So let's go back to the account abstraction, because I think that's I want to sort of drill down into, and I think that's really important. And I want to get a sort of sense of you work. Let's say you work with a gaming engine, and they build something on Sonic, and now they want to open the front door to new users, people who have never encountered crypto before, maybe even don't really realize that there's crypto in any, or blockchain, I should say. under the hood in any way, and they want to sign up, and you got to somehow give them a Sonic wallet without making them jump through all the hoops. Is it just a matter of entering in an email address and a password, and all of a sudden they have a wallet? Like, what does that onboarding experience look like? And how is that wallet protected? Is it custodial? Is it non-custodial? What does that sort of look like on the inside as well as the outside?
I mean, it's smart wallets, right? So it's a smart contract that is accessible via whatever authentication method you use. You know, whether that's passkey, OAuth, your own wallet. OAuth includes, Face ID, biometrics. There's Google authentication. There's a ton. Like all of the usual stuff. If you go onto a normal web app today or mobile app, there's Connect with Google or Instagram or whatever else. You click that, it does the third-party authentication, and then it at that point in normal Web 2 internet, it doesn't always go to that third party to authenticate. It creates a local profile for you that it unlocks with that third party authentication, and then while that session is active, you can do whatever you want internally. It's the same. That local thing it creates is that smart wallet. I'm actually a little bit hesitant to use the term smart wallet because, then people think about smart contract wallets. This is a new chain primitive. So, you'll have wallets, you'll have smart contracts, and you'll have this.
Yeah.
It acts like a public-private key pair, but on-chain. So, it can do the signing, it can do the access. You'll log in as you would normally. It'll then use that session ID to agree that you are the person allowed to sign for this. While your session is active, you can just sign and transact without needing to, press submit every single time. It can just place those transactions on chain on your behalf. And that's so architecture-wise, it's no different than what you see in traditional, Web 2 apps. It functions the same.
Got it. Okay.
None of these features, like fee sub, dynamic fees, account abstraction, none of them are innovative. As mentioned earlier, they all make our chain slower. They're all very simplistic features that I think historically chains didn't consider because you couldn't really slow down your chain.
Right. Well, I look, you made an interesting point earlier where we don't really hear these same sort of features being focused on by the other chains. At least I haven't either. So I think that there should be more focus on these particular features for the reasons that we've discussed. And I'm sort of surprised.
Well, there will be. I think it's inevitable that that's the direction. I mean, just like I'm sure you remember at the early days of internet access on mobiles. You had to configure like your access point name, and your cellular provider would have given you a specific one that you had to go manually type into your phone settings. That's again kind of similar, where at the start a lot about the stuff you're interacting with, whether it's the 56K modem example or a 3G on a phone example, and as time progresses, technology abstracts those things more and more and more and more away. Ultimately, blockchains are, to me, the same as in the US, AT&T, Verizon, whatever. Ultimately, you don't know. Or if you want to look at the app space, is the app you're using hosted on AWS, on Google Cloud, on Hertzner, or where is it? You don't know. It doesn't matter to you. You don't care. And ultimately, blockchains are a backend infra like those things I just mentioned. So you won't know what the app is on. All you'll know is you get the benefits of that disintermediary and decentralization or distribution that blockchain offers. And when it comes to gamings or social stuff, you'll know that you own your data and your identity or your items or your character, and like they're compatible with third-party systems and those kinds of things. But I think it's inevitable. I just think we're slightly ahead of the pack on this one, but that's also because we're throughput wise ahead of the pack. So again, you had to get that sort of over capacity in terms of speed to be able to now start thinking of these kinds of features.
Yeah, got it. So I seem to recall one of you posted something on X that you were looking at office space in New York. Yeah. And is the headquarters in New York now, or is it moving to New York? What's going on with that?
I think headquarters is a strong word. I don't think we've ever had a headquarters. We're not a. I think headquarters become important when do headquarters become important? Probably when you want to have that as your main contracting entity, if you want to use that as jurisdiction, or if you want to use that as your billing hub, I guess. We don't have any of that stuff, so I wouldn't call it a headquarters, but we do have presence in New York currently. I'm here, Matt's here, a few of our other guys are here, so we have presence. I don't know if I can go as far as to say that's a headquarters, but we've never had headquarters. So.
And you've had presence since like beginning of this year. So
June last year-ish.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
so it was actually, so you basically established a beachhead in New York prior to the election. I had actually thought that there was a reaction to the election where we ended up with an administration which was a lot more
look, just visas alone, we had to start even long before that. I mean, I think we applied for them 2023. I mean, that was a year process just to get the visas approved, and they were approved about mid last year, and then we could come here. So it's been about a 2-year process already. It was less a bet on the Ivor administration and more a bet on a lot of senators, House representatives, those kinds of things that were winning were pro-crypto.
Yeah.
So it was going to seep in, wherever it was, Democrat, Republic, Independent, ultimately, I don't think really mattered too much. I think it would have just been, a slow pace versus a fast pace. And luckily we got the fast pace one. So cool. But yeah, it wasn't reactive to the election. It was more reactive to the friction against crypto can only last so long, given that more and more of the Senate was becoming pro-crypto.
Interesting.
And I think it's also important to note that we've had team members going back years who have been from the US. We've hired people from Florida, New York, as Andre mentioned, California, and elsewhere. So we've always had, well, not always, but we've had for, the past few years, like a presence in the US, and obviously like a degree of the user base or the customer base and developers are from the US as well. And, it's obviously like the number one economy in the world for a number of reasons. It's a very, very big economy, very big user base. And so like, obviously, like it makes sense for us to, be doing stuff in the US as it is the case for many other crypto companies out there.
Yeah. Well, so you've been clearly, Andre, I know you mentioned that you watch the All In pod. I don't know if you watch it regularly, but I know you tune in, and you probably know at this point that Jason Kalkanis is an old friend of mine, and we actually were partners on a company, and he used to sleep on my couch when he had no money. So, we know each other pretty well. And so I am not connected directly to David Sachs, just sort of one hop away. But like you, I talk with Jason on the side, and I watch the show pretty regularly. And I've been, obviously very heartened by the fact that Sachs is now our crypto czar. And, and watching Mark Andreessen and A16Z people sort of talk about this development. One of the things that they said was, we can now, we've been sort of frozen in time for 4 years in terms of, developing, or we just couldn't move, right? Because we had Gary Gensler and Elizabeth Warren and the old administration being very antagonistic towards all this stuff. But now all the stuff we've been wanting to do for the last 4 years, we can suddenly try that stuff that we just haven't been able to try. How do you guys view that, A, and B, are you speaking with the people in DC? Because I know that I've seen like Cardano and Charles kind of palling up to Sachs and sort of getting a seat at the table, Ripple, and a few other entities. Are you guys sort of in that pack somewhere, speaking with people in DC? You're not. Okay.
I mean, I'll there's a there's a qualification there, but my default answer is no, because I don't want, you know, like again, there's good stuff happening in terms of regulation and the administration, and then there's the usual scammy garbage happening, you know, which is a bunch of the names you mentioned just bought seats at a table that ultimately is irrelevant. We've been having mid to high level conversations with stuff like CFTC lawyers, SEC lawyers, representatives, people like that, to see what appetite is there on the table to do what is still completely off limits. A much more practical approach than sort of a high level holistic approach, because with all due respect to, like, you know, people at that high level, like shoulder to shoulder Trump or whatever, that's not where the legislation and stuff's going to come from. That's where directive is going to come from, but not the actual implementation. And the practical is much more important. And that being said, as positive as the intention perhaps is towards crypto, as far as stuff like SEC, CFTC, DOJ, etc. is concerned, they're still not going to give you a stamp of approval right now or for the foreseeable future. Unless there is pure fraud or criminal intent, they probably won't pursue or investigate you. So like they've basically said that, look, there's now this gray area wherein you can operate, where let's say you want to be a automated market maker, right? And all of this stuff is more around apps than it is blockchains. Blockchains never really fell under this, but if you want to do a stablecoin, an AMM, a lending market, whatever, it's often a question of, okay, where can I go? You know, because maybe you want to be a lending market that's insured. You know, how do you get insurance? Maybe you want to be a AMM that trades securities. How are you allowed to trade in securities? So now with all of this stuff, leverage, CFTC, you know, each one of those guys have their domain. But the reason each one of those guys have their domain is very often because of brokers or clearing houses. So the reason why you need a license, if you want to do leverage and you need a license from the CFTC, the reason you have to do that is because in a traditional setting, you need a clearing house that settles that contract at some point in time. With a security, you need a contract that settles that. Because otherwise, I can tell you, hey, I'm going to sell you 1,000 Apple shares, and you give me the money, and then what? Then just, oops.
Yeah.
The thing is, that's not how crypto works. You know, there's no third party, there's no intermediary, there's no clearinghouse. So all of the rules and regulations these guys have had to protect those consumers doesn't apply here, and still doesn't apply here. And in all honesty, they don't know how it applies. It's not their pay grade. They're kind of waiting for other people to challenge existing rules, so it goes to courts, and then we get legislation on that. Also probably not going to happen now that it's a gray zone, right?
Yeah.
So the way it is now is, hey, don't outright commit fraud and stuff, and you can do it, but you're still not going to get a certificate or an endorsement or a seal of approval. So again, you know, there's sort of the yay crypto, very positive at the top level, and then there's the actual implementation and stuff. So another thing that's obviously gotten a lot of hype is the no capital gains tax for crypto issued in the US. As far as I know, there's to date not a single crypto in the US because there hasn't been a way to issue crypto in the US. So that doesn't apply to anyone, including all of those names who are sitting at those tables and saying how wonderful the new direction is. But when it comes to the practicality, it's all still wrong. So anyway, yeah, just I'd like to give a tempered answer to that question because, you know, it's the same as the US thing. Like we're here because we saw a future movement, but at the same time, you know, in 4 years' time, if they make it illegal again here, we'll close that shop and move out as quickly as we can. So it's It's a pet peeve seeing these teams that are ourselves included. Like we spend so much time and so much money on lawyers to give us sort of a clear balance check that, hey, we're not involved in the US, just so that now we are in the US. It's flip-flopping, man.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, that's more of a personal opinion than company-wise, but still, I think there's always the message, which is positive, and then there's the practicality, which is nothing currently, and won't be for the next year, 2 years, maybe even longer.
Well, I come to you for the nuanced answer. So thank you for that. It's exactly what I wanted. So, because look, you guys are real people doing real things, and you always have been. But I think now you're sort of, you're reaching your zenith point. This is the apotheosis of the last 5 or 6 years or whatever it's been. Sort of it all comes down to this. This is like your, Avengers Endgame. And I'm rooting for you guys. I love what you've done. I've always loved what you've been doing, and so I'm really, I want to see you win. And I look at some of these other people that do have seats at the table, and I'm like, you don't belong there. Like, you shouldn't be there. Like, that you've not earned that spot on the Avengers. Like, you're like Ant-Man, maybe not even Ant-Man. You don't even have a superpower, right? So why are you there?
Again, I'm hesitant to comment, because I do think those guys buying those seats is important, because it gives representation of a broader crypto market.
Yeah.
But at the same time, sitting at that table currently means absolutely nothing. I mean, you look at Trump signing those executive orders that David is reading for him verbatim. He's got no clue what's going on there, and he doesn't care. Like that's not his agenda, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So them sitting at that table and telling him about all the wonderful things stablecoins do ultimately isn't going to matter. That's not going to translate into action. So to me, let them buy the tickets, let them spend the millions of dollars to be at Mar-a-Lago and, get their photo op. So what? That's not where the stuff, the rules and the legislation and those things that are actually going to impact what we can build, how we can build, what we can't build is going to happen. So,
look, you got the president's family is involved in DeFi directly, and they're going to crypto conferences. I mean, I get what you're saying, and I feel that, and I feel your pain on some of this stuff. But I got to look at the fact that the president of the United States, his family, owns a crypto company that's involved in DeFi and is attending crypto conferences. It's not perfect, but it's north of where we were by quite a lot, right? So I'm forgive me if I'm a little bit more hopeful. So we'll see where it ends up.
That's value extraction, man. That's all it is. That's an opportunity to get as much money out of the stuff, to fund stuff that actually matters to them. It's not about advancing blockchain or crypto. It's about how do we use crypto or blockchain to get as much money to fund the stuff we actually care about.
I think you're right, but they're ecosystem participants, which is better than anti-ecosystem. At least we're there, right? So
I would say a little bit more aligned.
I hear you. Dude, I totally get it. Of course they're extractive. They're Trumps. That's who they are on Earth, right? So, but
that's like claiming that, I forgot his name, the dude that did Libra was adding value because he was a participant in the network. They're max extracting. It's not positive participation as far as
well, look, I'm not, just to be very clear, I am not a fan of the Trump meme coin. I'm not a fan of that Libra meme coin. I don't think it should be illegal, because it's a digital collectible.
100%.
But
100%. Shouldn't be legal. Anyone can participate, but I'm not going to pretend like that means that they're positively participating.
It's crass, and you're sort of using, you shouldn't be doing that. That should be beneath you. And I did not like it when that sort of appeared on the scene. That I thought that was a minus for the space. And frankly, I thought it was a minus for the Trumps and the United States of America. So I was thumbs down on that. I didn't like it. So I guess we're in agreement on that. All right, we're coming up on the hour here. Is there anything that I didn't cover that you guys want to get out there? And whatever you want to plug, now is the time. No?
I'm pretty chill.
I think a bunch of good stuff.
Okay.
To us, it's just about focusing on those 4 features over the next year, because our goal for by 2026, you should not know you're transacting on Sonic. Then we're good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, gentlemen, it's been an extreme pleasure. I've always wanted to meet you guys and sort of chat. And Michael, we actually met a couple times. I'm sure, it was in a mob where there was like 50 million people. So
I remember at a couple of different conferences. Yeah.
Yeah. We last time we met was in Florida. So I'm happy. I'm happy I was at least a little bit memorable. So thank you. But thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. And I know it took us a couple tries to get it to happen. And giant congratulations on all of the success. I hope you guys become enormous, even more enormous than you already are. And I own a bunch of Sonics, so I hope we all do well together. So that's it.
Yeah.
That's all I've got.
For the opportunity.
My pleasure. This has been Hash Rate. We'll see you all next time.
Have the AI observe the quantum double slit experiment. If it's able to collapse the wave function in exactly the same way as a human observer, then it's conscious like we are. There's someone at home in there.
Armand, your own father was part of Concordia. It was they who ordered him to produce the Musipocalypse. I'm chasing machine consciousness. Who will be first to make a soul in a mind made of metal? A real soul, electric sentience.
Metatronic.
This is a synchronicity engine. It is used to calculate a path through the world, one that produces favorable chance occurrences in order to obtain a specific result.
Look out! Drive faster!
I now know how to create an electronic peripheral that will allow for true conscious machines.
So this is the Atman project. This is not what I expected. Where are the military training camps?
Concordia believes that consciousness is primary, matter secondary. Reality, matter itself, is just a vibrational construct of frozen thought.
Here is a tale of a man's deeds and desires, of his quantum choices, of madness and twisted wires, his astrology encrypted and hidden from view. Only pyramids and shadows know the things that he'll do. Stop. Listen, I'll make you a deal. Me for them.
Your father didn't merely die in the challenges. Oh no, Verinder killed him.